Empathy is a superpower. So understanding whether that empathy is pointed at your colleagues who are on your team and understanding what they want from work, being curious about that, like what motivates you, what makes you want to do this work, um, and then trying to figure out how you can enhance that. That empathy is a real eye opener. Every engineering team or product team that I've been part of, rails against leadership, and I have done that plenty in my career. I have, as part of my own growth and journey, I've had to learn to be more empathetic to my peers. Like, to them, technology is hella expensive and a black box, and they don't understand why it's so hard. And so, opening up the aperture and helping them understand what makes it so hard has really invited them in, and they become then allies in how can we solve these problems better together, rather than how do I get Scott to do what I want. You can really shift the dynamics with empathy. You can get to a more high performing team. It can just be more fulfilling and more rewarding for you and for the people you're working with.
Hi, Scott. Welcome back. Welcome back to Software Engineering Tales.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be here,
really
Pavel.
glad that.
Thank you.
Cool. So, some of our audience don't know you yet. So, if you could introduce yourself a little bit and talk a little bit about your experience.
Sure. So probably the best introduction I can give is let's see. Gosh, I didn't prepare one. I spent years building products on teams. Coming from the lowest levels, I was a business analyst, first, and just worked my way up to leading product teams, leading UX, leading engineering, to ultimately then working at where I'm at at 3Pillar Global, where I led delivery for 3Pillar across all of those functions. And I definitely realized my passion is helping teams, helping craftspeople do better work than they thought they themselves could do. That is really rewarding for me, that kind of growth. And so now what I'm doing is I'm trying to help organizations that are leveraging technology in their business think how they can think about that technology. And these are connected because one thing I realized is a lot of what holds us back from doing our best work is when leadership teams are not clear-headed on what they're doing with technology. And so those of us who are working on making that technology come to life, struggle to make it come to life in a way that the business can benefit from because of that lack of clarity. And so sort of, connected mission here is how do I help those leaders better engage that process to understand their own biases and work through them. So that's what I'm focused on now. Name of my company is Olo. Which ties to the city you're from, Olomouc, where I meet some time ago. Really focused on humans and how they come together and do things with technology. That intersection of technology and humans. That's what I'm fascinated by.
So, we're talking about like high performing teams and building software engineering teams. How do you build a software engineering team that just gets together and is like really good at their work and just clicks?
I spent so much of my career trying to uncover the formula for this, because it is magical when you can be on a high performing team. If you've ever been on one, you will never want to work any other way. So it's so great, but they are so elusive. They're so difficult to create. I was lucky enough to be on high performing teams at two different companies I was at, and I became almost afraid to leave the second company because I was like, this is too good. I don't want to lose this. And actually what drove me to 3Pillar was just the opportunity to explore how can we do this recursively, predictably across different geographies, with different clients and different circumstances. Are there ways we can unlock this? So, I have a lot to say on this topic. I don't know that I do not have it down to a formula by any stretch, but one of the things that I think is really great is first of all, if team members have not experienced what it's like to be on a high performing team, painting that picture of what it could feel like, I think is part of it. And then, I feel the retrospective is such a misunderstood and mal applied tactic. But to put some of the fuzzy stuff, like how do we make this feel better for those of us who are on this journey, or if you're in the boat, if you're rowing the boat and you're trying to get it to its destination, you're part of the team. You should have you have a stake in what it feels like to be a member of that team. And so, how do we empower you to have ideas, to have suggestions, to express needs that are maybe outside of just the writing code or quality or whatever aspect you're focused on, but about how the team functions. And so some of the things that I've been exploring is like, how do we norm on, it's funny. I saw you just had a LinkedIn post that you commented on about interruption, right? And context switching. How can we make
Yeah,
interruption something we talk about? Like, I was a very empathetic, product leader. And so I felt bad every time I interrupted an engineer because I knew I was taking them off the task I needed them to get done for us to have a successful sprint. But I also needed information to get ready for the next sprint. That's my job. And I can't do my job without their input. And they want to give me that input. But how do I do that in a way that doesn't take you out of that flow state, that doesn't damage your productivity? Well, let's just talk about it. Let's create times when it's okay for me to ask, and let's create times when you're like, please don't, unless you really need me. In which case, then you can work on. It's okay if you mute Slack, but if I text you, I really need you. Kind of things like we can norm on this. We can do better. And if you start working on those little details, like how we
yeah,
spend our days is how we spend our lives, then you can get to that a higher level of productivity, self actualization. It's more fulfilling. It's more fun, and we're delivering more value to the business at the same time. Um, Sorry, just one other thing that comes to mind here is like, you know, as a middle leader, I always found that my superpower was trying to figure out what does each individual on the team want. They want something from work. If they're any good, if they're engaged. If they're not engaged, it's really hard to make somebody a high performing team member. But if they are engaged and if they want something from work, it's like, how do I connect the thing that you want to the thing that our bosses want? And there's oftentimes there's plenty of room for this to intersect. And I've always been clear, like, it's my job to make other people very wealthy. I deploy technology to create wealth. Cool. It doesn't matter to me that I don't get the wealth. That's not what I'm in. I'm not in this for that. I have a job. I do get paid. I get compensated, and et cetera. But there's something richer and more meaningful to me that I want out of this experience. And so the byproduct is making other people wealthy. It's not the thing that I get out of bed to do. So how do we put as much of that, like what do you get out of bed to do, and put that into the center of the table and say, okay, well, how can we do more of that? If you want to play with more technologies, okay, let's, when the opportunity arises, let's have Pavel, focus on new technologies, and, he's going to do some tinkering, and, we'll time box it and we'll do things to protect our other commitments. But there's ways to integrate these things into what we do and to acknowledge the human part, and that I think makes it then much easier to show up when things are, gosh, I don't love doing this, but I'm totally willing to do it because on this team, I'm getting so much out of it that I'm willing to put in that the work that I don't love. Um, and I think that's part of it.
are you able to summarize a little bit like some patterns that help, promote this culture towards like high performing teams and maybe some anti patterns that go against it and you saw it quite
I'll
often?
tell you, I've seen more anti patterns than the other ones. I've seen a lot of, and there's a reason why most teams are not high performing teams, right? So, and a lot of it is just humans being humans and doing what they think is right, but it's ultimately not all that insightful in terms of how So one of another tool that I use, like, because I get asked this question, how do you know a team is high performing? And one of my litmus tests for this is, are team members doing discretionary effort? Meaning, and you know this, like when you get a ticket, you can do what's necessary per the ticket to call it done and move it from this column to that column, right? Or you can do extra. You could think about, what are ways in which there could be vulnerabilities in this code that I just wrote, or what are some additional unit tests I could
Yeah.
write that are going to help us later debug what broke somewhere else in the system, right? That's what unit tests help us do. Um, you can do these things transactionally just enough and call it done, and you're probably going to pass the code review, or you could do that a little bit extra. So which one are you going to do? And I think that high performing team members on high performing teams where they have a sense of obligation, purpose, mission, some connection to the mission of the team. Why are we assembled here? What are we doing? they're going to do discretionary effort and they're not really going to think about it as extra work. But let's not be, coy about it. They are doing extra work. They're not doing work they have to do in order to collect their paycheck. They're not doing work that they have to do in order to be deemed fully competent in their role. They're doing the extra bits, and those extra bits stack up tremendously in terms of the products that we produce. The outcomes that those products are capable of, they make a big difference. And so when you put these two teams, and of course we can never afford to fund two teams to build the same technology, right? But if you could, there's, I mean, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, but there is no doubt in my mind that the team that is high performing and highly committed to the mission will drastically outproduce and outperform and have much better results,
Yeah,
resiliency, quality, all the things that you would care about. They're going to produce a lot better product in all the ways. And I'm talking about the financial results, the way it performs with clients, everything. So yeah, so I think that idea of a litmus test, like how do you recognize high performance, is really important. But then once you understand this about discretionary effort, then all these anti-patterns fall away. You can't do command and control, right? If I come in and I'm telling you what to do and you have no intrinsic motivation or internal connection to what we're doing, then it's just a job. Then I'm going to do enough. I'll do the job. I mean, anybody who's competent. I'm not talking about your poor performers. I'm talking about your totally fine performers. There may be even strong performers based on the rubric of the company, but they're not doing the discretionary bits. And another great example of discretionary effort. This is one of my favorites actually. Was when QA would come to me as a young product leader, and they would say, "Scott, I need to pass this ticket, but I don't think it's right. I don't think it's what we meant to do." And if you think about it,
yeah,
like that moment is magical on so many levels. Like it is the most efficient, self-serving thing that person can do is pass that ticket and move on with their lives. To stop what they're doing and bring that to me to have this
yeah,
conversation is a commitment to mission. It is nothing else. Because if they're just doing their job, they passed that ticket, they wrote their
yeah,
test, they are done. Um, but that conversation is gold because even if I'm like, no, actually, you're wrong. This is exactly what we want. I'm now educating them on like what kind of a product we're trying to create and correcting a misunderstanding they might have, or even as is more likely, like they're right. The engineering team built what they thought the ticket described, but it ultimately it fails some other test, whether it's usability or it's just directionally not, it wasn't implemented correctly. Probably because the user story I wrote was bad. It was incomplete, but which is totally happens all the time. I can't write every user story to be totally
yeah,
complete. Like
yeah.
make sure you do this and don't do that. And no, that'd be a terrible world to live in as well. So you start to see this as a collaborative. Like I don't own the product. Yeah, my title might be product owner, product manager, whatever. I don't own the product. We do. We are judged by what we ship. And so I think that
Yeah.
mentality of like, this is a joint venture, how we operate as a team, the product we create, thinking about code as a giant art project that we're all collaborating on that might be worth a lot of money, and you start to think about some of the things
Yeah.
that can
Oh,
reinforce how could a team do that and do it well, that sense of buy-in, shared ownership. I think those are some of the principles. I don't know about patterns. We could dive more in. Those are, yeah.
these principles, sound valuable. And if I take our team, for example, we are like our team is like full of subject matter experts, you know, people who just know deeply some part of what we are trying to build and what we are trying to achieve. And then it's exactly as you described it, collaborative effort. And quite often, when we get deeper in some tickets, in some features, and we start refining them, we push quite a bit, not just how we are going to build something, but ask if it's really the thing that we should be
Yes.
building and if it should work like that. Because yeah, the way from like high level requirements to the detail is long, and the devil is usually in the details. And sometimes, some vague descriptions can be very
Mhm.
ambiguous in the way how what was the purpose behind that, what was the
Well, and
idea
it was
behind
it was
that.
a shift
So
in
yeah,
my career as a
I
product
can.
person to do less prescriptive describing, this is what I want the feature to do, and more, this is what I'm hoping we're going to accomplish, and to be much more anchored in that. And then of course, there's all kinds of techniques to try to remind product people to do that. But if you're not, if you haven't absorbed the spirit of it, like it's an invitation, right? So like if I write a user story that is directional, it's an invitation for you to come in and help me make the everything else that comes after the my intention is my thoughts on what how we can achieve that intent. But if you have better ideas, I want to hear them, right? Like that's where we can start to say, like, look, you as a technologist and another human being have a different perspective on this. What do you have to bring to the table? Um, I think that you can innovate and create a lot more value through that kind of collaboration. And again, this, the mentality of like, well, if you give me perfect requirements, I'll create a perfect, perfect code is a terrible model for creating great products. Like that's just not how great products get built.
Yeah,
It should be much
yeah,
more horizontal, much more. We have a shared mission. Yes, there's certain work that I do more of than you're going to do, but definitely those feedback loops and those opportunities to make it better than I thought of when I was left alone to create user stories the week before engineers got to look at anything. You know what I mean? So I started as I got more and more senior,
yeah,
I started to retreat more and more from writing details. And it was more like, here's the constraints. I wanted to make sure that the engineer knew the constraints. It can't do this, it can't do that, whether it's legal or something environmental, right? Something outside of the code, but something in the
yeah.
market that we have to respect. Maybe privacy, maybe we're not allowed to share, personally identifiable details on this page, or it could be anything, or in an API. Um, at the same, it's interesting. On the same token, as I want to encourage engineers to play a bigger role in the requirements. I think I hate that word. So, but it's the word that gets used. So I'll throw it out there. The requirements. The things that we're going to build. I also encourage product people to learn about technology and not because they should be weighing in on what's right or what's wrong, but they should understand the trade-offs that are being made. Um, and to take a real interest because
Yeah.
it affects our customers, right? So how could I not want to weigh in? So I ask a ton of questions, and this helped me become ultimately technical enough to be able to lead engineering teams. But I asked a lot of questions. I was like, I don't understand what asynchronous messaging means, but can you break this down for me? Like, why do we want it? Messaging queues, all of these technology, pub sub models, webhooks, all these things. And I was like, oh, like this really helps my system be more resilient and fault tolerant, if we do these right. So then thinking through system dynamics and how our systems would integrate with client systems, and what kind of use cases would I need to think about as part of that, made me a better product manager, and then made it possible for me to join the debates that engineers were having about technical trade-offs. Should we do this? Should we do that? What approach should we take? Um, and of course, my role is to represent the market and client trade-offs, um, but I think that's part of the collaboration, right? Like we should get out of our lanes so that we can add value throughout the product
Yeah.
lifecycle.
You mentioned that, one important thing for teams to basically improve the way they are working together and to push towards this like high performing team status, let's say,
Mhm.
is retrospective done the right way. And what I see quite often is that, retrospective is this meeting where 30% of the team is talking or raising some points. It's often skipped because there is,
Mhm.
something more important. And so how to do that, really, that meeting that is meant to be the most important thing in the whole sprint, basically. Because I think it is the most important
Yeah.
thing in the whole sprint, because that's the opportunity to, refine how we work and, get somewhere into
Yeah.
better position. So what's your
Well,
experience with that?
one thing I think it's super important to break through, and a lot of teams struggle with this, is that the retrospective is not for leadership. It's not for anyone outside the team. It's for the team. It is by the team for the team. It is
Yeah.
entirely a self-centered ritual where we get to talk about how do we want to do this better going forward, and which of those things do we want to prioritize improving on first, right? And you're right. I oftentimes, even the person running it makes a difference. So I remember when I was at a company before Three Pillar, it was important for me not to be in retrospective. Ultimately, it was really nice. My teams asked me to be in retrospective because I would ask questions like, is there, I'd ask agile values questions or principles questions like, how can we eliminate more waste? Or are there any synchronous conversations that can be turned into asynchronous, where we don't lose value by doing that? And just trying to prompt them to think through like, how can we live better? And it was always interesting, especially if I pushed into the human side. How can we make this more rich and rewarding? What are some untapped needs that you have? Um, and just to get people to open up again on the human side, we tend to think it's about code and code reviews and pull requests and builds and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, sure, like that. Don't get me wrong, fair game. Like we should absolutely talk about those things. And some of our biggest productivity gains were usually in those areas, right? And improving the way those worked. Um,
Yeah.
but um, but yeah, just bringing the humanity often brought much better results in terms of the ideas that would come forth. Um, big growth opportunities for individuals. Um, yeah, asking, and you know this because this is a big part of our story, but asking what's the nature of quality and how can we do quality better? What does quality mean to us?
Yeah.
Those, I mean, I can be quasi philosophical about this stuff, but they often open the aperture away from just the rituals or, the nuts and bolts of slinging code and shipping code and just to make it more rich and rewarding, and come together in a different way. But I think the key really is to make sure that it's a meeting for the team by the team. Everyone outside is, kind of use the Scrum logic, right? Like you don't have any bacon, so you should be quiet unless you're asked to talk. Like it's not your meeting. If you're not on the team, then
Yeah.
this is not your meeting. These aren't your norms that you're shifting. Um, but it was always really fun for me to participate. But I was super keen to make sure, no, this is your meeting, and I respect that. And I may have things that I need you to get better at, but the retrospective is not my meeting to do that. I will ask that outside of retrospective. Because at that point I was, a VP of technology and product, so um, I'm not on the team.
And engineering teams are like often shielded from everything else in the company, or they should be, because they should not care too much. But who is the person? I think it's CTO, or some role, or maybe product owner, some role like that, who should be dealing with these effects from other you know departments, like, I don't know, sales, maybe some product department. I'm
Mhm.
talking bigger companies, uh, dealing with influences that are
Mhm.
bad for the team. And how do you get to know that everything is working okay or not?
Everything is working okay from what perspective? Well, sorry, what do you mean?
Yeah, from perspective of like, so let's say the engineering team has, let's say, uh, they think that there is some constant pressure, there are some issues that are affecting them, even though they
Mm.
should be shielded from it. you know I can imagine like constant changes in some high level
Mhm.
feature roadmap, you know some constant changes in like budgets and, and,
Mhm.
and stuff like that. So and this can influence quite a lot, like how smooth the work is and what is the
Yep.
gain in the end,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I one thing that is has been reinforced with me so many times throughout my career is that so much of the circumstances of technology have to do with human psychology. Um, because ultimately humans are using
Yeah.
technology to do things that humans want to achieve, right? And oftentimes their ambitions greatly exceed capacity. I think one of the things that really was difficult for me as a product manager was like I'm always disappointing everyone all the time, so I'm just choosing who to disappoint more. And so that starts to feel a little bit like you're just managing your losses rather than able to win. But that's sort of a nihilistic view, but there's an opportunity in this to get beyond the stated ask, right? So there's the thing that they say they want, which is, usually overly specific, right? But it masks a deeper need, a deeper why. And we know this in general, like, right? Like, so we were just talking about, I may tell you I want a feature and it does this and step one, step two, step three. But when you ask me, like, what am I trying to achieve? I give you a different statement. And then you're like, oh, well, if you want to do that, I got another way to do that. And I'm like, oh, actually, that's better. So it seemed like I was really wedded to step one, step two, step three. But in the end, I really just I had this higher or deeper, depending on how you want to look at it, need that I was trying to meet. And that's true of our stakeholders as well. So I encourage engineers, if they're interested, um, to try to understand those things, because ultimately, while we might have gotten into the sport because we wanted to write code, beautiful code, at the end of the day, it's in service of humans. And so you're reminded that the humans have a huge
Yeah.
influence on how successful we are, on whether or not our code gets used, and ultimately on our lives and on our satisfaction. And so it's in our interest to try to understand those things better. Um, and ultimately we can apply then our craft to produce more value if we do it. Like when sales says they want X, they actually
Yeah.
mean this
And
other thing. So let's go make sure that we're solving for that other thing, which for them they didn't think they needed to say. But now that I've gotten to know them or someone in sales, I now have this insight, and so I know to dig for that extra thing. I'm trying to think of a really good example, but I think you know what I mean.
what I'm interested in is like, what is the trigger for a company to, ask your help, basically?
Mm,
What is the state of the company when they start thinking, okay, we need someone from the outside
hmm
to, you know, get things better?
hmm
So
Yep.
what is the trigger?
So you'll appreciate this. So once you s- so I've seen this a bunch. So once companies decide, they usually the core of your business is usually not necessarily directly technology, right? There's only a limited
Yeah.
number of companies that produce technology in order to generate financial results. A lot of them are using technology as an enabler for their business. And so um, oftentimes what will happen is you stand up teams, you start down the technology route, and in the early days you have some low hanging fruit, you have some easy to understand wins, like if we build these things, this is how our business will accelerate and improve. As soon as you have any working software, however, things get immediately harder for a whole bunch of different reasons.
Hmm.
The first thing is that the existing technology you just created has to be maintained and has to be evolved. Your users, we obviously a three pillar, we would talk about products are never done. That's just true. If it's value generating, the expectations of your users are increasing. The moment they get their hands on it, they've got additional things they would like to see that technology do for them. Right. So there's untapped value potential on the thing that you already did, but your initial hypothesis about technology was probably like two or three more things or areas where it could improve your business. But your existing team is allocated to that existing thing that they've created now and need to maintain. Maintenance usually is not a big consideration when you're first starting out. You're just not That's not what you're thinking about. You're
Yeah.
thinking about building, right?
Yeah.
Why should it have to be maintained? Nobody thinks
Yeah.
about libraries going out of date or security vulnerabilities being
Yeah.
discovered, right? Nobody enters this thinking of that
Yeah.
that
Move,
aspect.
move
So
fast and get to market, right? So
yeah, we'll get to market as soon as possible, and then we'll iterate. We'll figure it out, right? So they kind of didn't have all the understanding they needed, and so you're kind of caught between, again, this unbridled ambition. Like technology is going to do all these things, but I didn't really do my homework that well to really know how much value we could create. And now I've got this nagging maintenance thing that's happening, where I have to spend new money to create no new value, right? Maintenance is not a sexy thing to spend money on. There's
yeah.
no ROI on maintenance, right? So there's definitely there's cost avoidance by doing maintenance, but there's not new return. And so that in of itself is a challenge. But then you run into, now that you've stood up teams and people are filling those backlogs with ideas, you're no longer doing the diligence on, like, what are the high value opportunities. And so what I see a lot of companies get into is that they'll invest in a lot of like they're not bad ideas. They're just not good enough to justify the cost.
Yeah.
When you total up, and this is the fun thing that I get to do now with companies is I'll show them their costs on an hourly and monthly basis. All in, it's hosting, employees, vendors, tooling, right? You put all those things on the table, you total them up, and then you calculate the hourly burn, and it's a big number. It's a really big number. And so never has, time is money been more true than when you're looking at an engineering spend and you're like, and it's engineering, product, UX. I'm not trying to just pick on engineering, it's all of it. But the fact is this is what it costs to do this. And it's a big number. And if you don't have a thesis on how you're going to return $6 to $10 for every one you put in, that's the kind of returns you're expecting from technology to make it worth it, then you really are just investing in
Yeah.
not much, right? And so companies fall into that trap. They get over that initial hump of like, wow, that was great. And now, gosh, why has it gotten so? And it just gets hard. It feels like muck, right? You get that sense of it's a swamp. I have to spend new money to protect the existing value that I have, but I don't know that I'm generating the kinds of results that my investors expect, my leadership team expects, my ambition wants, right? So as a leadership team, and then you've got sales, they want to tap into new markets. They're really worried about hitting their quotas and having, and one of the things I think is really interesting is go around the table of a leadership and think about what's their biggest fear. We know from some of the work that's been done in psychology that fear is a much better motivator than goals. So goals are
Yeah.
beautiful, but fear is a much more potent motivator. And so if you think about your CTO, what is your CTO worried about? I mean, what do you think the CTO at your company is thinking? What do you think they're thinking about? What's their biggest fear?
I mean, some like big, technology issue, like some big catastrophic disaster on production, something like that.
Security breach probably
Yeah,
is up on the
something
top
like
top
that.
three,
Yeah,
right?
we
Especially if
lose
it
data,
brings down the whole
legal
system.
hack, something like that. Yeah,
Yep. Yep. That would be my bet as well. Whereas your head of sales is worried about, are we doing enough to be valuable in new
will
markets?
will we do the quarter? Yeah,
Exactly. Right. Your head of client success is worried about your existing clients, and churning a big current client would be disastrous. I mean, these are all the reasons why they would be called in front of the leadership team and ask, what are you doing about this? You need to fix this, right? And oftentimes it's reputational, it's pride. I mean, if there's something that I've learned about engineers is, and all craftspeople is there's a lot of pride.
yeah.
There's a lot of concern around reputation. They want to be respected. That's really important. And so if we apply that same moniker to our leaders and understand these are some of the things. So when you get into the technology space, you think about the use of technology to create business value. Think about how those people sitting around that table wish they could point the technology teams in terms of what they would be focused on. They're very, very different, right? How the CTO would spend your user story points and how your head of client success would spend them and how your head of sales would spend them, totally different. And then you've got a CEO who's got their own ambitions and vision of a world that they want to create. And you start to realize like there's a real tension in that room in terms of, fears and ambition, and how do we navigate this so that we feel that we are using the capacity, that we are spending this money no matter what. How do we make sure that the return is going to be there? And just as important in these businesses, how are we making sure we're reintegrating those solutions back into the business? So if we create a cool product, can we make sure we can market it, we could sell it, we can explain it to our current customers well? I mean, that full life cycle of technology is really difficult to do well. And so right after that initial hump is really where my clients tend to bring me in. It's like something's wrong. Where this has gotten really hard, and some of it is just hard, and some of it is just me explaining like, yes, it's hard, and it's hard for everybody. You're not alone. You're not special. I wish you were, but you're not. Like, maintenance is a thing. You're going to have to do it. Um, but to get them to be more strategic in terms of like, let's make sure we don't do the mediocre features or the mediocre products or the mediocre investments. Let's do the high value ones that we're really committed to, making this a powerful part of our business.
Is there some like process that you have tested multiple times and it's working, how to get into these details and
Mm.
basically find out what are the issues, what should be done on like this level between different stakeholders with their ambitions and fears and idea of what we should spend money on basically.
Yeah. So the way that we try to help leaders better engage the process of deploying technology and services of the business is to, so I call it a strategic operating system. Like if part of your strategy is leveraging technology, then these are especially important. So you think about, we've come up with like 12 different aspects of the business operating system that can get out of alignment. And with these, you can do too much or too little of them, and both of them are a problem. I'll use an example that'll resonate with you. You can plan too much and you can plan too little, right? Like I can put, all kinds of pressure on you to make your estimates 100% right. And you'll get to, 80% maybe, but you'll burn so much value getting there that it's not valuable in the end, which doesn't mean we should go the opposite way and not do any planning. Like planning is important. It's important to have some level of expectation around the business. So finding that Goldilocks zone, that nice green middle of not too much, not too little, is what I try to help them. Um, I try to help these leaders engage the process from that perspective. Because so how does this affect craftspeople, right? So if you have a leadership team that over indexes on precision in planning, they're going to ask you as engineers to size all these things that they're not going to do, right? Because you have to size more than all the candidates for the next release cycle,
Yeah.
and they're going to ask you to do estimates out the wazoo and to make sure that you're precise on in your estimates. Now, I can show you plenty of studies that'll show you that engineers will always be wrong on their estimates. It's just a matter of how much wrong, and it's because we make assumptions as humans. Again, study after study has shown this. Your estimates will be wrong. And I used to tell my engineers, like, I don't need you to be right. I just need you to be consistently wrong. If you're consistently wrong, I can model it. So every time you tell me something's an 8, I make it a 13. Every time you tell me it's a 13, it's a 21. Like I don't want to, I don't want to spend more time. I just need your rough, effort size. And then I want you to give me a doubt and complexity factor so that I can apply the right multiples to each of these numbers to set expectations with my stakeholders, right? And then we're making capacity judgments. All that to say, like, how do I arm leaders to be able to engage this process and not over-index on something that ultimately destroys more value than it creates? We want to find that zone where we're getting the value of planning without the destruction of precision, or the destruction of like, we'll just point the team in that direction, and when they're done, they'll let us know. That's not good. You're not going to get a high performing product team out of that. And more importantly, you're going to fail to realize the value of what the team has produced, because if you're not able to anticipate when features are going to become available, then you're not telling your clients about them. You're not getting ready for those moments when that value is there. You don't want it to sit on the shelf any longer than it has to. You want to start realizing value from it. So again, finding that Goldilocks zone is so important for leadership, um, to engage this process productively, and be able to do their jobs better. And so what we do is we help the leaders assess, how strong do you think you are right now on planning? Tell me some stories. Why did you give yourself, on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate yourself on any one of these 12 aspects? And then we have an opportunity then to educate them on, this is what good looks like. This is what the green zone is. Not too much, not too little. You should want to be here. And here's why. So we have an education opportunity. So that helps them then be, as
Yeah.
leaders, more equipped to engage this process of technology, to see the anti-patterns that they may have engaged in, or, maybe they just made the assumption, like, I used to work with a head of marketing that was like, Scott, I need you to hit your dates because I'm planning a marketing campaign around your dates. And I was like, do not base your marketing campaigns on my release date to production. Do not do that. Like, we will agree. Like, I will tell the team to do feature flags, and we will align our marketing campaign to the date that we're willing to release the feature. But that's turning it on in a config. It's not deployed to production. Like, you're indexing on the wrong date. And this gives us more room so this would be another factor of a high performing operating system: resiliency. We need a certain amount of resiliency so that when there's failure or, when there's movement, right? So I said it was going to be done on March 4th. Turns out it's going to be March, 16th, because guess what? There was found work. There were things we didn't, it was just normal, right? This happens all the time. That should not sink our business.
Yeah.
So how do we operate with more resiliency in mind? And when you bring these things to the table, you give them many more tools that we think of in technology, feature flags. We have a word for it, but for businesses, you can abstract that and say, you need more resiliency so that the marketing campaign and the user's experience of that feature can be coordinated. Or maybe I need to like train my customers on a new feature that's going to change the way certain things work now. Those are disruptions that we want to plan, we want to be thoughtful about. And this is also a place where engineers can get a lot better. If you can anticipate those moments and say, this is not a backward compatible feature, this is a meaningful change. And of course, you can only know it's meaningful if you know something about your users, right?
Yeah.
But if you know this is a meaningful change, you might say to yourself, gosh, I should put a feature flag behind this. Because otherwise I risk a blow up in my face where I'm rolling back a release to production. And that's not good. But so you can anticipate those things, or ask the question. You shouldn't always just do it, right?
What do you think that will, AI do with the balance of these things?
I get asked that all the time. It's such a, I mean, well, first of all, let's just acknowledge it is early days with AI, and none of us know what the future of just AI in a box, what it looks like, right? So I'm going to lead with a lot of humility. I don't know. What I think the most important thing about AI from my perspective right now is that the need for technology is going to increase. Because whether you have a competitor who's claiming AI and that's resonating with your customers, and so they're leaving you to go to them, right? That's going to create a business imperative to deploy your own answer. Now, whether that's AI powered or not it may be meaningful if your clients really care that the word AI was used. Most clients don't actually care whether it was AI powered or not. They want it to do a thing. And so if you do that thing without AI, great. It matters a lot to investors because it sounds sexy. It can get you into sales conversations you don't deserve to be in, right? So everyone's using the word AI to sort of open these avenues of value, but they're not really valuable yet, right? There's very, very few companies that are leveraging AI and delivering real value. There are some, but a lot of, I mean, if you look at OpenAI, for example, one of the market leaders in this space, they're destroying way more value than they're creating. They are a disastrously unprofitable company.
Yeah.
And so like just the pure mechanics of that, the ROI sucks on LLMs, right? So, but now that they exist for the rest of us who get to benefit from these commons, right? That they've put these APIs out there, now we can build derivative products that leverage those LLMs to do other valuable things. But even there, the use cases that I've seen are all pretty small. So I think the jury is out on this. Like, I don't know how, I do know it's a transformational tool. I mean, I look at it like the internet. If we think about, internet technologies came, obviously in the 70s or whatever, even earlier, but we really saw them, the dot-com boom was in the 90s, and then everything bust. We had the dot-com bust. And then about, 15 years after that, all the things that were memes about why the dot-com bubble was such a bubble are now normal things. We now order pet food online. We get groceries online, right? These were jokes in the 90s.
Yeah.
Who would think to do this? It's so dumb. And then now you can buy, gourmet dog food and have it delivered to my front door, and people do it. So now so we have a supply side fascination right now. AI is a new tool. It allows us to do new things in new ways, and it's super cool. The demand side is not there yet. People's willingness to pay for this stuff and pay what it costs and pay more than what it costs is not there. So the ROI right now is negative.
There's this
It'll be interesting to see what happens.
term that is buzzing on like social networks, and it's called like vibe coding. I don't know if you heard yet.
White coding?
Vibe coding, like vibe. Yeah, it's
Oh,
it's like
vibe coding.
vibe coding, yeah. And it means basically that you are building products only using like prompts to AI. So you
Mm,
don't. So basically, the claim is that you don't need to really understand what's happening under the hood, and it will
right.
do all the code for you, and it will work, and it will be safe. And yeah, I'm at this point laughing, but maybe because there were like abstractions in the past, right? We don't do assembler these days, so let's see what the future will bring us. But I think that there still will be a need for engineers, and I don't think that majority of the
Yeah.
code base will be AI generated. So
And I mean, like if you think back, I mean, I think AI is great for there's all kinds of stuff that AI is helpful for. I don't know if you're using it in your coding environment, but like, I mean, you remember probably linters, maybe you're even still using linters. Those they clean up syntax, right, and just make our code more readable. I can imagine AI tools recommending places we would add comments where today we might forget. You can just imagine it being a really great um, again, pattern recognition, right? Like other features in your code base have these features, whether they're
yeah,
comments or they're, syntax or whatever, um, preventing you from creating duplicate classes or deviating from naming conventions, right? These are all mistakes that we make as engineers, and they just make it harder to maintain these systems. So all of that's, I think, great. Like those are great. They're here today. That's certainly not AI creating an application or a complex system. We're a long, long way off from that. And I do think too, AI is so prolific. I mean, we're seeing this in content. If we just take articles for now, AI generated content is already getting pumped out there.
yeah,
And we're becoming more discerning and understanding what's AI generated content and skipping it, right? So we see all the clickbait. It's actually making people read less. So that's kind of a bummer. I mean, for people like you and I who are active on LinkedIn,
yeah,
it's kind of it's kind of a bummer. But I think it's going to increase the craving for authenticity and non AI generated stuff. It's
yes,
gonna raise the bar. Um, yeah. So I mean, ultimately, I think it's great because there's with more. I mean, as an economist, I believe in competition yields innovation. People will go for more and more value. Unfortunately, though, it's prolific. So we're going to see a lot of apps that do fairly trivial things, and there's just
yeah,
going to be a lot of them.
fairly same things. Yeah,
Yeah, and very exactly very similar things. And it's like, okay, great. Like I haven't seen everything. So I saw what Anthropic put out around generating apps from Claude, and I thought it was interesting. But every example they used was super tiny, not
yeah,
terribly interesting application. Like it was neat, like and how many people have told me about this game they created for their kid or something like that. And it's like, yeah, like when I took basic in middle
right.
school, which I now is like decades ago, like I created a game too. Like neat. It was not anything that anyone should care about. So I think these tools are fascinating. They fire up the imagination, but all of these trends, like they're going to replace engineers, I think is a little bit crazy. Like we will move our expectations to match the tooling. Another interesting parallel. Sorry, I'm getting texted to death over kids' activities. Um, One interesting parallel was that when I was in college, we talked about this how all the innovations in terms of domestic technology, so refrigerators and dishwashers and washing machines and all of this, did that back then we would do laundry. Let's just take laundry. We do laundry like once a week and put it out. And put I know in the Czech Republic we still do this. Put it on the clothesline so we get that fresh air. Drying. Here we don't bother. We just put everything in a drying machine and call it done. But but if you think about it, it didn't take away or reduce the need to do laundry. We increase the amount of laundry we do. We do laundry more often
Yeah,
than we used to because of these machines. So, yes, it made the burden less, but we then shifted our expectations up. And I think that we should look at all tools and progress in technology that way. We will shift our expectations. It's not going to destroy the need for engineers. It's going to increase the need for good ones. What
gener-
I worry about is the junior engineers and their ability to accelerate their careers, because the delta between not knowing anything and getting to being able to participate in a really high class system, a difficult system, that barrier is there, and whether or not there will be jobs that let you traverse that part of the growth curve. That's going to be that's the concern that I have.
Yeah, that will be a little bit of issue, I think. Yeah. There will be much less these roles. Yeah, definitely. So one last question for you. Just one idea that I should take home with me, what it should be from the whole talk today.
Empathy is a superpower. So understanding whether that empathy is pointed at your colleagues who are on your team and understanding what they want from work, being curious about that, like what motivates you, what makes you want to do this work. Um, and then trying to figure out how you can enhance that empathy is a real eye opener. Every engineering team or product team that I've been part of, rails against leadership, and I have done that plenty in my career. I have as part of my own growth and journey, I've had to learn to be more empathetic to my peers. Like, to them, technology is hella expensive and a black box, and they don't understand why it's so hard. And so opening up the aperture and helping them understand what makes it so hard has really invited them in, and they become then allies in how can we solve these problems better together, rather than how do I get Scott to do what I want.
Yeah.
You can really shift the dynamics with empathy. You can get to a more high performing team. It can just be more fulfilling and more rewarding for you and for the people you're working with. So that would be the one thing that's at least what I'm stuck on these days.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you very much, and see you around.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Pavel. I appreciate it. Great chat.